Tom Garrett stood on the front porch of his ranch house, watching the dust cloud approach from the east. At 40 years old, he had learned to read the desert like other men read newspapers, and this dust cloud carried more than just another visitor to his remote Nevada spread. The stagecoach that emerged from the heat shimmer was smaller than the usual freight runs, with only 2 passengers visible through the windows. As it rolled to a stop in front of his house, Tom noticed the nervous energy of the driver and the way the passengers seemed reluctant to emerge. "Mr. Garrett?" The driver climbed down, consulting a folded paper. "I've got a delivery for you. Special arrangement through the territorial office." Tom's weathered face creased into a frown. He hadn't ordered anything from town, and official deliveries to his isolated ranch were rare. "What kind of delivery?" The coach door opened and an elderly Mexican woman stepped down first, her black dress and silver hair speaking of dignity despite her obvious nervousness. She turned to help the second passenger, a young woman who moved with careful grace, her eyes downcast. The girl couldn't have been more than 19, with auburn hair pinned back in a simple style, and wearing a traveling dress that had seen better days. She was beautiful in a quiet way, but there was something in her posture, a tension, a wariness, that made Tom's instincts prickle with concern. "Senor Garrett," the older woman spoke with a slight accent. "I am Senora Martinez. This is Elena Rodriguez. We have traveled from Santa Fe on behalf of certain parties who wish to honor an agreement with you." Tom's confusion deepened. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I haven't made any agreements with anyone in Santa Fe. There's been some mistake." "No mistake," a new voice cut in. Tom turned to see Marcus Webb riding up on a sweating horse. Webb was a lawyer from Carson City who occasionally handled legal matters for the territorial government, and sometimes for less official entities. "Tom," Webb dismounted, his usual oily smile in place. "Good to see you. I bring greetings from our mutual friends in Santa Fe. I believe they mentioned they might be showing their appreciation for your discretion regarding certain business matters." The pieces began falling into place, and Tom felt his stomach turn cold. 6 months ago, he had witnessed a meeting between several prominent territorial officials and what appeared to be Mexican bandits. The meeting had taken place on his land, without his permission, and when confronted, the officials had made vague threats about what might happen to uncooperative ranchers. Tom had chosen to keep quiet, but apparently someone had decided that his silence needed to be purchased. "This is the appreciation?" he asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Elena is a gift," Webb explained smoothly. "A bride, to help ease your loneliness out here. Her family has arranged everything. The marriage contract, the dowry settlement, all very legal and proper." Tom looked at the young woman, Elena, and saw her flinch slightly at Webb's words. Her hands were clasped so tightly in front of her that her knuckles had gone white. "And if I refuse this gift?" Webb's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went cold. "Now why would you do that, Tom? Elena here is pure as driven snow, well-educated, comes from a good family. Any man would be honored to have such a bride." The threat, underneath the words, was clear. "Accept this arrangement or face consequences." "Besides," Webb continued, "the marriage ceremony has already been performed by proxy in Santa Fe. Legally speaking, she's already your wife. We just need you to consummate the arrangement." Tom felt sick. He looked again at Elena, seeing now the slight tremor in her hands, the way she kept her eyes fixed on the ground. This wasn't a gift or an honor. This was human trafficking dressed up in legal language. "Senora Martinez," he addressed the older woman, "might I speak with you privately?" She nodded and followed him a few steps away from the others. In rapid Spanish, she began to speak urgently, tears forming in her eyes. "She is my niece," she whispered. "Her father owed money to very dangerous men in Santa Fe. They said they would kill him and her brothers unless she agreed to this marriage. She doesn't know. She believes this is to save her family." "And is it?" Senora Martinez's face crumpled. "I don't know. These men, they make promises, but I fear for all of us." Tom looked back at Elena, standing small and frightened next to the stagecoach, and made a decision that would change both their lives. "All right," He called out to Webb. I accept the arrangement. Relief flooded Webb's face. Excellent, I knew you were a reasonable man, Tom. Elena, come meet your husband. Elena approached slowly, her movements careful and measured. When she finally looked up at Tom, he saw eyes that held more intelligence and pain than any 19-year-old should carry. Senor Garrett, she said quietly, her English accented but clear. I am honored to be your wife. The formal words sounded rehearsed, and Tom's heart ached for this young woman who had been thrust into an impossible situation. The honor is mine, he replied gently, taking care to keep his voice respectful. Would you like to see your new home? As Webb and Senora Martinez prepared to leave, the older woman would be staying overnight before returning to Santa Fe. Tom showed Elena through the modest ranch house. She examined everything, with the careful attention of someone trying to learn the boundaries of a new prison. The bedroom is upstairs, Tom said when they reached the foot of the wooden staircase. You'll have privacy there. I sleep in the back room downstairs. Elena looked at him with surprise. But we are married now, surely you expect? I expect nothing, Tom said firmly. You're safe here, Elena. Whatever brought you to this situation, you're safe now. For the first time since her arrival, Elena's rigid composure cracked slightly. Thank you, she whispered. As evening fell and the others settled in for the night, Tom found himself sitting alone on his porch, staring out at the Nevada desert and wondering what the hell he had gotten himself into. He had thought he was accepting a wife to protect himself from political threats. Instead, he suspected he had just become part of a rescue mission he didn't fully understand yet. The house felt different with Elena in it. Tom had lived alone for 3 years since his first wife Sarah had died in childbirth along with their son, and he had grown accustomed to the silence, the predictable rhythms of a solitary life. Now, even with Elena moving quietly upstairs, the house seemed to hold its breath. Senora Martinez had departed that morning after a tearful goodbye with her niece, promising to write and leaving Elena with a small trunk of belongings and what appeared to be a great deal of whispered advice in rapid Spanish. Tom tried to maintain his normal routines, checking on the cattle, mending fences, preparing simple meals, but found himself constantly aware of Elena's presence. She moved through the house like a ghost, exploring carefully, touching nothing without seeming to ask permission with her eyes. At dinner, they sat at opposite ends of his small kitchen table, the silence stretching between them like a chasm. The food is very good, Elena said finally, picking at the simple stew he had prepared. My first wife taught me to cook, Tom replied, said a man needed to be able to feed himself and anyone else under his roof. Your first wife? She died? Tom nodded. 3 years ago, in childbirth. I'm sorry. They fell back into silence, but it felt less strained now. As Tom watched Elena eat, he noticed details he had missed earlier. The way she favored her left wrist as if it had been injured recently. The careful way she sat as though sudden movements might cause pain. The occasional wince when she thought he wasn't looking. After dinner, Elena immediately began clearing the table despite Tom's protests. Please, she said. I must earn my place here. You don't need to earn anything. This is your home now. Elena paused, a plate in her hands, and looked at him with an expression he couldn't read. Is it? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning that Tom suspected went far deeper than simple domesticity. As night fell, they found themselves in an awkward dance around the house's evening routines. Elena had discovered the small collection of books in Tom's front room and asked permission to read, which he granted gladly. He settled into his usual evening tasks, cleaning his rifle, updating his ranch ledger, while she curled into the old armchair by the window with a volume of poetry. The domesticity of it should have been comforting, but Tom found himself watching Elena covertly, noting the way she started at unexpected sounds, the way her eyes occasionally darted to the windows as if checking for threats. Around 10 o'clock, Elena carefully marked her place in the book and stood. I should prepare for bed now, she said, her voice carefully neutral. Tom looked up from his ledger. Elena? She paused halfway to the stairs. You don't owe me anything, he said quietly. I want you to understand that. Whatever you think is expected of you is my as my wife. You're under no obligations. Elena's hand tightened on the stair rail. For a moment, Tom thought she might say something, but instead she simply nodded and continued upstairs. He waited until he heard her door close, then gave her another hour before banking the fire and preparing for his own sleep in the small room off the kitchen that he had converted into a bedroom after Sarah's death. But sleep wouldn't come. Tom lay in his narrow bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of the house. Around midnight, he heard something that made him sit up, soft crying from upstairs. He debated with himself for several minutes, then rose and padded quietly to the bottom of the staircase. The crying continued. Not hysterical sobs, but the quiet, heartbroken weeping of someone trying not to be heard. "Elena?" he called softly. The crying stopped immediately. "Are you all right?" A long pause. Then, "Yes. I'm sorry if I disturbed you." Tom stood at the bottom of the stairs, torn between respect for her privacy and concern for her obvious distress. "Elena, I'm going to make some coffee. If you'd like to come down and talk." Sometimes talking helps. Another long pause. Then the soft sound of footsteps across the floor above. When Elena appeared at the top of the stairs, Tom could see she had been crying. Her hair was down, falling in waves around her shoulders, and she wore a simple white nightgown that made her look even younger than her 19 years. "I couldn't sleep either," she said quietly, making her way downstairs. Tom busied himself with the coffee, giving her time to compose herself. When he turned back with 2 steaming cups, he found her sitting at the kitchen table, her hands folded in front of her. "Elena," he said gently, setting her coffee down and taking the chair across from her, "I need you to know that whatever brought you here, whatever you're afraid of, you're safe now. I give you my word on that." Elena looked up at him, and in the lamplight, Tom could see the intelligence and pain he had noted earlier, but also something else, a desperate need to trust someone. "Senor Garrett, Tom, there are things you don't understand about my situation." "Then help me understand." Elena wrapped her hands around the warm coffee cup as if drawing comfort from its heat. "What did they tell you about me?" "That you were a gift. Payment for my discretion regarding some business matters I witnessed." Tom's voice carried his distaste for the arrangement. "That you were pure, from a good family." Elena's laugh was bitter. "Pure?" Yes, they would say that. She was quiet for so long that Tom began to think she had changed her mind about confiding in him. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "My father did owe money to dangerous men. That part is true. But the debt, it wasn't gambling or business deals gone wrong." Elena's hands began to tremble around the coffee cup. "My father was selling information to bandits, telling them when merchant caravans would be traveling certain routes, which ones carried the most valuable goods." Tom felt his stomach drop. He was working with bandits? For 2 years. But when the territorial authorities started investigating the raids, Papa became inconvenient, a liability. Elena's voice grew stronger, as if telling the truth was giving her courage. The men who came for payment weren't interested in money anymore. They wanted silence, permanent silence, and they offered to spare your father in exchange for you. Not exactly. Elena finally met his eyes, and Tom saw a pain there that made his chest ache. "They said they would kill Papa and my 2 younger brothers unless I agreed to marry you and gather information about your ranch, your activities, your connections." The truth hit Tom like a physical blow. "You're supposed to spy on me." "Yes. And report back to whom?" "I don't know their real names." Papa always just called them Los Jefe, the bosses. "But one of them said he worked with territorial officials. Said you had witnessed a meeting you shouldn't have seen?" Tom ran his hands through his hair, pieces of a larger puzzle falling into place. "Elena, the meeting I witnessed. It involved Mexican bandits and what looked like territorial officials. If your father was feeding information to those same bandits, then we're both caught in the same web." Elena's voice was steady now, as if confessing the truth had given her strength. "Tom, I need you to understand something. I agreed to come here not just to save my family, but because I prayed, that if I could find a way to warn you, maybe together we could find a way to stop this." Tom stared at her across the small table, seeing not the frightened girl who had arrived that afternoon, but a young woman of remarkable courage who had walked into what she knew might be a trap in order to protect both her family and a stranger. Elena, what exactly are you supposed to report about me? Your routines, your connections in town, whether you keep records of your business dealings, whether you have any evidence of the meeting you witnessed. Elena's hands had stopped trembling, and whether you could be trusted to keep quiet permanently, or whether you might need to be dealt with. The implications sank in slowly. Tom realized that by accepting this arrangement, he had likely signed his own death warrant. Once Elena reported back that he was suspicious or unreliable, he would probably have an accident or simply disappear like so many other inconvenient witnesses in the territory. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "You're risking your family's lives by warning me." Elena met his eyes directly for the first time since her arrival. "Because when I saw you today, when you told me I was safe, when you gave me your bedroom while you took the smaller room, I realized you were not the man they told me you were." "What did they tell you? That you were cruel, that you had demanded a virgin bride as payment for your silence, that you would use me and then discard me when you grew tired." Elena's voice grew strong with conviction. "But I see now that they lied about you just as they lied about everything else." Tom felt something tight in his chest begin to loosen. "Elena, what you're telling me, it changes everything. If we're going to survive this, if we're going to protect your family, we need to be completely honest with each other from now on." "Yes, and we need to figure out exactly who we're dealing with and what they really want." Elena nodded. "I may be able to help with that. Before I left Santa Fe, I overheard some conversations. Names, places, plans." Tom reached across the table and gently covered her hands with his. He felt her startle at the contact, then gradually relax. "Elena, I need you to know something. Whatever we decide to do about this situation, you are not alone anymore. We're in this together now." For the first time since her arrival, Elena smiled, a real smile that transformed her entire face. "Together," she repeated, as if testing the word. As dawn approached, they sat at Tom's kitchen table planning not a marriage but a survival strategy. Outside, the Nevada desert was waking up to another scorching day. But inside the small ranch house, two people who had been thrust together by forces beyond their control were discovering that sometimes the best partnerships are forged. In the crucible of shared danger, Tom's hands had indeed been shaking through the night, not from fear, but from rage at the men who had tried to use both him and Elena as pawns in their deadly game. By morning, his hands were steady again, and he had a mission. Over the next few days, Tom and Elena fell into a careful routine that would appear normal to any observer, while allowing them to share information and plan their next moves. To anyone watching from a distance, they looked like a newly married couple learning to live together. In reality, they were allies gathering intelligence for a war neither of them had chosen. Elena proved to have an extraordinary memory for details. As they worked side by side, she helping with household tasks while he tended to ranch work, she recounted conversations she had overheard, descriptions of men who had visited her father, and fragments of plans that painted a disturbing picture. There were at least 6 men involved, she told him one afternoon as they repaired a section of fence together. 3 Mexican, 3 American. The Americans dressed like businessmen, but they talked like soldiers, always using military terms, talking about operations and assets. Did you hear any names? The leader of the Mexicans was called El Coronel, the colonel, tall man with a gray beard and a scar across his left cheek. The Americans. One was called Morrison, another was Webb. Tom's hammer froze mid-swing. Webb? Marcus Webb, the lawyer? I think so, yes. Thin man with oily hair and a nervous laugh. That's him. He's the one who brought you here. Tom felt pieces clicking into place. Elena. If Webb is involved, this goes much higher than I thought. He handles legal matters for half the territorial government. Elena's face paled. How high does it go? That's what we need to find out. But carefully. If we ask the wrong questions to the wrong people. They both knew how that sentence ended. That evening, as Elena prepared dinner, Tom made a decision. Elena, I need to ride into Carson City tomorrow. There are people there I trust, people who might have information we need. Elena's hands stilled on the vegetables she was chopping. It's dangerous for you to leave the ranch. What if they're watching? It's more dangerous to stay ignorant. Besides, it will give you a chance to write your first report to them. They had agreed that Elena needed to maintain her cover by sending information back to her handlers, but the intelligence would be carefully crafted to buy them time while revealing nothing useful. What should I tell them? That I'm a simple rancher set in my routines, suspicious of strangers but gradually warming to you? That I keep no records of unusual activities and seem to have forgotten about the meeting I witnessed? Make me sound boring and harmless? Elena managed to smile. That won't be difficult. You are many things, Tom Garrett, but boring is not one of them. The comment surprised him. Over the past few days, he had found himself genuinely enjoying Elena's company. She was intelligent, curious, and possessed a quiet courage that he deeply admired. If circumstances had been different, if they had met under normal conditions. But circumstances weren't different, and Tom reminded himself that their partnership was born of necessity, not affection. The next morning, Tom rode out before dawn, leaving Elena with careful instructions about maintaining security around the ranch. The ride to Carson City took most of the day, giving him time to think about what he knew and what he needed to learn. His first stop was the office of Sheriff Robert Hayes, a man Tom had known since before the war. Hayes was one of the few lawmen in the territory that Tom trusted completely. Tom Garrett. Hayes looked up from his desk with surprise. What brings you to town? Don't tell me you're having rustler problems again. Something like that, Bob. I need to ask you some questions, and I need you to keep this conversation between us. Hayes immediately grew serious. What kind of questions? Tom chose his words carefully. Have you heard anything about bandits working with inside information? Raids that seem too well planned, too well timed? You mean like someone's telling them which caravans to hit? Hayes leaned back in his chair, studying Tom's face. I've had suspicions. Too many successful raids, too few witnesses left alive. Why do you ask? I think I might have stumbled across something. Bob, if someone was running information to bandits, who in the territorial government would have access to shipping schedules, merchant routes, that kind of thing? Hayes was quiet for a long moment. Tom, what the hell have you gotten yourself into? I'm not sure yet. That's why I need your help, all right? But this conversation never happened, understood? Hayes pulled out a map of the territory and spread it on his desk. If someone was coordinating bandit raids, they'd need access to several types of information. Shipping schedules from the freight companies, patrol routes from the territorial marshal's office, and advance notice of when valuable shipments were moving. Who has that kind of access? Half a dozen men in the territorial administration, the deputy territorial secretary, the marshal's chief clerk, the freight commission supervisor. Hayes paused. And anyone with connections to Marcus Webb's law practice. Webb again. Bob, what do you know about Webb's clients? Officially, he represents merchants, ranchers, some government contracts. Unofficially? Hayes lowered his voice. Rumor is he handles legal work for people who prefer not to have their business examined too closely. Mexican clients, among others. Tom, you're asking dangerous questions. If Webb is involved in something illegal and he finds out you're investigating, I understand the risks. Bob, I need one more favor. If something happens to me in the next few weeks, I need you to look into this. I'll get you evidence if I can, but if I can't... Hayes grabbed Tom's arm. Tom, whatever this is, let me help. Don't try to handle it alone. I'm not alone, Tom said, thinking of Elena back at the ranch, but I need to be careful about who else gets involved. Tom's second stop was the Territorial Records Office, where he spent 2 hours researching land transfers, freight licenses, and business partnerships. What he found confirmed his worst suspicions. Webb's name appeared on dozens of documents related to properties that had changed hands under suspicious circumstances, always representing buyers who seemed to have unlimited cash for land that other people were suddenly eager to sell. As he prepared to leave Carson City, Tom made one final stop at the telegraph office to send a message to an old Army friend who now worked for the Federal Marshal's Service in California. The message was simple. Need information about territorial corruption. Discretion essential. The ride back to the ranch gave Tom time to process what he had learned. The conspiracy was larger and more sophisticated than he had initially realized. Webb wasn't just a corrupt lawyer. He was part of a network that included territorial officials, Mexican bandits, and probably wealthy buyers who didn't ask questions about how properties were acquired. And somehow, he and Elena had been thrust into the middle of it. Tom arrived home just as the sun was setting, to find Elena waiting on the porch with obvious relief. How did it go? She asked as he unsaddled his horse. We're in more trouble than we thought. Tom replied, "but I also think I know how we might get out of it." As they sat down to dinner, Tom shared what he had learned in Carson City. Elena listened intently, asking sharp questions that showed she understood the implications. "So Webb and his partners aren't just stealing land," she summarized. "They're running a complete operation. Bandits raid the caravans and eliminate witnesses. Territorial officials provide inside information and cover up the investigations. And Webb handles the legal transfers when families are forced to sell their property cheap. That's my theory. And if I'm right, then you and I aren't just random victims. We're loose ends that need to be tied up." Elena was quiet for a moment, absently stirring her coffee. "Tom, I wrote my first report today. Made you sound exactly as we discussed. Harmless, routine, forgettable. Good. How long do you think that will satisfy them? Maybe 2 weeks. Then they'll want more detailed information, proof that I'm actually gathering intelligence. Then we have 2 weeks to figure out how to bring this whole operation down." Elena looked up at him with an expression that mixed fear and determination. "Tom, what if we can't? What if they're too powerful, too well-connected?" Tom reached across the table and took her hand. "Then we'll disappear, both of us. I have some money saved, and there are places in California where we could start over. You would do that? Give up your ranch, your life here, for someone you barely know." Tom looked into Elena's dark eyes and realized that his feelings for her had grown far beyond mere partnership. "Elena, I would do that for you. Whatever this started as, whatever brought us together, I care about what happens to you." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "Tom." Before she could finish the thought, they were interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Tom immediately blew out the lamp and moved to the window, Elena close behind him. 3 riders were approaching the house in the darkness, moving slowly and deliberately. "Stay here," Tom whispered, grabbing his rifle from beside the door. But as he watched the riders approach, Tom realized they weren't trying to be stealthy. One of them called out while still 50 yards away. "Tom Garrett, Federal Marshal Jackson out of California. I got your telegram." Relief flooded through Tom as he recognized the voice of his old Army friend. But even as he moved to greet the marshals, he couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out faster than he had hoped. The war for their lives was about to begin in earnest. Marshal Bill Jackson looked exactly as Tom remembered him from their Army days, tall, lean, with prematurely gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. The 2 deputies with him were younger but carried themselves with the same alert professionalism that marked experienced federal lawmen. "Tom," Jackson said as they clasped hands in greeting, "when I got your telegram about territorial corruption, I figured it was serious. But riding out here in the dark suggests it's more urgent than I thought." "Come inside," Tom replied, glancing around the darkness for any signs they might have been followed. "There's a lot you need to know." Elena had retreated upstairs when the marshals arrived, understanding instinctively that her presence might complicate Tom's explanation of their situation. But Tom called her down after a few minutes, knowing that Jackson needed to hear her story directly. "Marshal, I'd like you to meet my wife, Elena." The word wife still felt strange on Tom's tongue, but it was the safest explanation for Elena's presence. "She has information that's crucial to understanding what we're dealing with." Jackson studied Elena carefully as Tom made introductions. "Ma'am, Tom says you might have intelligence about bandit operations in this territory." Elena glanced at Tom, who nodded encouragingly. Taking a deep breath, she began to recount her story. Her father's involvement with the bandits, the threats against her family, and her arranged marriage to Tom as part of a larger scheme. Jackson listened without interruption, occasionally taking notes in a small ledger. When Elena finished, he was quiet for several minutes, processing the implications. "So you're telling me that territorial officials are working directly with Mexican bandits to steal land and eliminate witnesses?" Jackson asked finally. "That's what the evidence suggests," Tom confirmed. "And Elena and I are both being used as pawns in their operation." Jackson turned to Elena. Mrs. Garrett, you said you overheard names, descriptions. How certain are you about these details?" "Very certain, Marshal. I have a good memory, and I knew my life might depend on remembering correctly." "All right." Jackson closed his notebook and looked at both of them seriously. "Here's what we're dealing with. For the past 2 years, my office has been investigating a network of cross-border criminal activity. Bandits, land fraud, corruption. We've had pieces of the puzzle, but never enough to make a case that would hold up in federal court. And now we might have the missing pieces. But Tom, Elena, what you're describing is dangerous for all of us. If these people realize they're being investigated, Tom nodded grimly. We understand the risks. But Marshall, this network has already killed God knows how many innocent people. If we don't stop them, they'll just keep killing, including us, Elena added quietly. Jackson stood and walked to the window, looking out at the darkness. All right, here's what we're going to do. Elena, you're going to continue sending reports to your handlers, but now you'll be feeding them information that we control. Tom, you're going to maintain your normal routines, but we'll have deputies watching your ranch. What about evidence? Tom asked. We need more than testimony. We need documents, financial records, proof of the conspiracy. Jackson turned back to them. That means getting inside Webb's operation and probably getting access to territorial government files. Elena spoke up. Marshall, there might be another way. My father kept records of his dealings with the bandits. Names, dates, payments. If those records still exist, where would they be? Hidden in our house in Santa Fe. Papa was careful, but he was also frightened. He might have kept evidence as insurance. Jackson's eyes lit up. Insurance against his partners turning on him. That makes sense. Elena, would you be able to find these records? I think so. But Marshall, my family is still in Santa Fe. If I return and something goes wrong, we'll protect your family, Jackson promised. But I won't lie to you, this is going to be dangerous. Over the next 2 hours, they developed a plan. Elena would return to Santa Fe under the pretext of visiting her sick father. While there, she would search for any records he might have hidden and try to gather more intelligence about the conspiracy's leadership. Meanwhile, Tom would maintain his ranch routines while Jackson's deputies conducted covert surveillance of known conspirators. How long do we have? Tom asked. My guess is 2 weeks, maybe 3, before they expect detailed intelligence from Elena and start getting suspicious about your activities, Jackson replied. After that, he didn't need to finish the sentence. After that, Tom and Elena would both be marked for elimination. As Jackson and his deputies prepared to leave, he pulled Tom aside for a private conversation. Tom, I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. Your feelings for this woman, are they going to interfere with your judgment? Tom considered the question carefully. Over the past week, his feelings for Elena had indeed grown beyond mere partnership. Her courage, intelligence, and quiet strength had impressed him deeply. But more than that, he had come to genuinely care about her welfare. I love her, he admitted quietly. I didn't plan for it to happen, but it did. But Marshall, that makes me more determined to see this through, not less. Elena deserves a life free from fear, free from being used as a pawn in other people's games. Jackson studied his old friend's face. And she feels the same way about you? Tom hesitated. I don't know. We haven't had time to explore normal feelings. Everything between us has been about survival. Well, if you both survive this, you'll have plenty of time to figure that out. Jackson clasped Tom's shoulder. Just remember, we need both of you thinking clearly. Don't let emotion override good judgment. After the marshals left, Tom and Elena sat together in the kitchen, the weight of what lay ahead settling over them like a heavy blanket. Are you afraid? Tom asked. Terrified, Elena admitted, but also relieved. For the first time since this began, I feel like we have a real chance, Elena. About what Jackson suggested, you returning to Santa Fe? I have to do it. Tom, those records could be the key to stopping all of this. Tom reached across the table and took her hands. I know, but the thought of you walking back into danger. Elena turned her hands palm up, intertwining her fingers with his. Tom, a week ago I thought my life was over. I thought I was being sent to marry a cruel stranger who would use me and discard me. Instead, I found... She paused, searching for words. What did you find? I found someone who sees me as a person, not a possession. Someone who treats me with respect and kindness. Someone who... Elena's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Someone I could love if we survive this. Tom felt his heart skip. Elena, I know this isn't the time for such conversations, she said quickly. I know we have more important things to worry about, but I needed you to know in case something happens in Santa Fe. Tom lifted their joined hands and pressed them to his chest. Elena Rodriguez Garrett, if we survive this, when we survive this, I want to court you properly. I want to earn your love the right way, not because we were thrown together by circumstances. Elena smiled. the first genuinely happy expression Tom had seen from her. "I would like that very much." They spent the rest of the evening planning Elena's trip to Santa Fe, discussing routes, cover stories, and contingency plans. But underneath the practical planning, Tom was acutely aware of the shift in their relationship. What had begun as a partnership of necessity was becoming something deeper and more precious. As Elena prepared to go upstairs to bed, she paused at the foot of the staircase. "Tom, there's something else I need to tell you about my father's records." "What is it?" "If they exist, if I can find them, they won't just implicate the bandits and the territorial officials." Elena's expression grew troubled. "They'll also have information about other families like mine, people who were coerced, threatened, forced to cooperate." Tom understood immediately. People who could be hurt if this information comes to light. Yes, innocent people who did terrible things because they were afraid for their families. Elena met his eyes. "Tom, when this is over, what happens to them?" It was a question Tom couldn't answer. Justice was rarely clean or simple, and the fallout from exposing this conspiracy would likely harm innocent people along with the guilty. "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it," he said finally. "Right now, our priority has to be stopping the people at the top." Elena nodded, but Tom could see the weight of moral complexity settling on her shoulders. She was thinking about her father, about other families caught in impossible situations, about the difficult choices that desperate people make. "Elena," Tom said gently, "your father made mistakes, but he was trying to protect his family. You don't have to carry guilt for his choices, don't I?" Elena's voice was sad. "If I hadn't been his daughter, if my family hadn't needed protection, maybe he never would have gotten involved with these people." Tom stood and walked to her, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. "Elena, listen to me. You are not responsible for other people's choices. You are only responsible for your own. And your choices. To warn me, to trust me, to fight back against these people. Those choices have been brave and right." Elena leaned into him, and Tom wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. For a moment, they weren't conspirators planning dangerous missions. They were just two people finding comfort in each other's presence. "Whatever happens in Santa Fe," Tom murmured against her hair, "whatever we find or don't find, we'll face it together." "Together," Elena echoed, the word carrying all the hope and determination they both felt. The next morning would bring new challenges, new dangers, and the beginning of the most perilous phase of their mission. But for now, in the quiet of a Nevada ranch house, two people who had been thrust together by forces beyond their control were discovering that sometimes the strongest bonds are forged in the crucible of shared danger and mutual trust. Elena's return to Santa Fe was carefully orchestrated. She would travel as Mrs. Elena Garrett, visiting her ailing father and checking on family affairs. A perfectly reasonable explanation for a new bride's temporary absence from her husband's ranch. Marshal Jackson had arranged for discreet surveillance, and Tom would receive coded telegrams reporting on her progress. But as Elena's stagecoach disappeared into the desert heat, Tom found himself consumed with worry that no amount of federal protection could ease. The first telegram arrived 3 days later. "Father improving. Visiting old friends. Weather pleasant." The coded message meant Elena had arrived safely and made contact with her family without arousing suspicion. Tom tried to maintain his normal routines, but everything felt different without Elena's presence. The house was too quiet, meals were solitary affairs, and he found himself constantly scanning the horizon for threats or for any sign of her return. The second telegram came a day later. "Father's old papers found. Some need sorting. Extending visit." Elena had found her father's hidden records and was working to decipher them. Meanwhile, in Santa Fe, Elena was discovering that her father's paranoia had served them well. Hidden in a false bottom of an old trunk, she found a leather portfolio containing detailed records of every transaction, every meeting, every payment related to his work with the bandits. The names and dates painted a picture even more disturbing than what she and Tom had suspected. The conspiracy reached into the highest levels of territorial government and included wealthy landowners from both sides of the border. More troubling still, the records showed that the operation was expanding, planning to move into Arizona and California territories. but it was a letter hidden with the financial records that made Elena's blood run cold. Written in her father's careful handwriting, it was addressed to my beloved daughter Elena and dated just days before her departure for Nevada. My dear daughter, it read, if you are reading this, then my worst fears have come true and the men I worked for have decided that our family has become inconvenient. The records in this portfolio are my insurance policy, but I pray you will never need to use them. Elena, you must understand that everything I did was to protect you and your brothers. These men are more dangerous than you can imagine, and their reach extends far beyond what we know. If they have sent you away to marry this rancher, it is not for the reasons they told you. Be very careful whom you trust. There are federal authorities who can help, but there are also corrupt officials who work for our enemies. The only man I trust completely is Judge Martinez in Albuquerque. He is your mother's cousin and a man of absolute integrity. My daughter, if the worst happens, if these men decide that we know too much, do not try to save us. Save yourself and stop them from hurting others. You have always been the strongest of us all. With all my love and prayers for your safety, Papa. Elena sat in her childhood bedroom, tears streaming down her face as she read her father's final words. He had known. Even as he agreed to send her away, he had known that none of them might survive this conspiracy. Her younger brothers, Miguel and Carlos, found her there an hour later. Elena? Miguel, now 17 and grown tall in her absence, sat beside her on the bed. What's wrong? You've been different since you came home. Elena looked at her brothers, Miguel with their father's serious eyes. Carlos at 15 still bearing traces of childhood but already showing the signs of premature worry that had marked their family for months. I need to tell you both something, she said, making a decision that went against every protective instinct she possessed. And then I need you to help me decide what to do. Over the next hour, Elena told her brothers everything. About Tom, about the conspiracy, about their father's records and the letter he had left. She watched their faces change from confusion to horror to determination. So this rancher, this Tom Garrett, Carlos said when she finished, he's been protecting you more than protecting me. He's been treating me like a partner, like someone whose thoughts and opinions matter. Miguel studied his sister's face. You love him. It wasn't a question, and Elena didn't try to deny it. Yes, I didn't expect to, but yes. Then we help, Miguel said firmly. Whatever you need to do to stop these people and get back to him safely, we help. Elena felt fresh tears starting. Miguel, Carlos, if we do this, if we expose these records, there's no going back. Papa will likely be arrested along with the others. We might lose everything. We've already lost everything that matters, Carlos replied with wisdom beyond his years. Papa hasn't been himself for 2 years. You were sent away like a piece of property. At least this way, we fight back. That night, working by candlelight, the 3 siblings photographed every document in their father's collection, using a camera that Miguel had borrowed from his friend who worked at the local newspaper. Elena carefully noted which documents were originals and which were copies, ensuring that they would have complete evidence even if something happened to the physical records. The next morning, Elena made 2 trips, first to Judge Martinez's office in Albuquerque, traveling under the pretense of handling legal matters for her new marriage. The judge, a dignified man in his 60s, listened to her story with growing anger and agreed to serve as a secure repository for copies of the documents. Her second trip was to the telegraph office, where she sent a carefully coded message to Tom. Father much worse, may need extended care, consulting specialists. The message meant that the conspiracy was larger and more dangerous than they had anticipated, but that she had found crucial evidence. Tom's reply came within hours. Take all time needed. Specialists consulted here as well. Marshall, Jackson had received additional intelligence from other sources and was prepared to coordinate with Elena's findings. But as Elena prepared for her final night in Santa Fe before returning to Nevada, she made a discovery that changed everything. Her father, who had been growing increasingly ill during her visit, finally confessed the truth about his condition. Elena, he whispered from his bed, I haven't been sick. I've been poisoned. Slowly, over months. They're killing me because I know too much, but they're doing it gradually so it looks like natural illness. The revelation hit Elena like a physical blow. Her father wasn't just a victim of circumstance, he was being murdered and his death was being used to control her behavior. Papa, we can get you help. Find a doctor. No, mija. It's too late for me, but not for you. He gripped her hand with surprising strength. Elena, you must get those documents to someone who can use them. And you must be very careful about whom you trust. There are federal marshals working with our enemies. Elena felt the world tilting around her. If there were corrupt federal officials, then even Marshal Jackson might not be trustworthy. That night, she made a decision that would either save them all or get them killed. Instead of returning directly to Tom's ranch, she would make one more stop to verify Jackson's credentials and ensure that she wasn't walking into another trap. As the stagecoach carried her away from Santa Fe the next morning, Elena carried with her not just evidence of a criminal conspiracy, but the terrible knowledge that the web of corruption was even wider and more dangerous than anyone had realized. Tom was waiting for her return, but she was bringing more than just intelligence. She was bringing the key to either their salvation or their destruction, and the awful responsibility of deciding which people to trust with the power to determine their fate. The game was about to enter its final, deadliest phase.